Hey everyone, hope you're having a great holiday season. Today I will be presenting on creating inclusive immersion using virtual reality. This is a conceptual framework for VR accessibility within education. I just want to preface by saying I will be using the term accessibility challenge learners or students throughout this presentation. This is to be more inclusive and stray away from harmful and institutionalized terms. Okay, so on this slide, I just wanted to give an overview of how I obtained my data for the literature review. I used a conceptual analysis to synthesize and integrate literature on accessibility, inclusive design, and VR. The the literature I reviewed were on case studies on high school students with sensory or cognitive accessibility challenges. My goal for this review was to connect the universal design for learning, embodied cognition, social model of disability, and immersive learning theories to principles of inclusive virtual reality design. My sources are peer reviewed journal articles and institutional reports published between 2008 and 2025. The literature was sorted into sections and evaluated based on the relevance to VR accessibility, user experience, and instructor views. The synthesis was then organized to identify patterns, gaps, and relationships among the four frameworks mentioned earlier. So on this slide, I'm just going to give an overview of my research question. So my first research question is, which VR design features and interaction methods best support access, engagement, and learning for different types of accessibility challenge learners? My second was, how do design strategies that apply universal design for learning, embodied cognition, immersive learning, and the social model of disability theories influence learner experience, usability, and equity? And lastly, I wanted to know what institutional practices such as onboarding, training, procurement, and evaluation are needed to implement and sustain accessible VR within an educational setting. Okay, on this slide, I wanted to give an overview of the four theoretical frameworks used to analyze and connect the literature. The Universal Design for Learning, also known as UDL, is an educational framework that focuses on creating learning environments that accommodate all learners by providing multiple means of engagement and representation. This allows learners to have an equitable learning experience. An example of UDL would be the following: a science lab wants students to explore a virtual ecosystem. The students can choose between a guided mode with step by step instructions, an explore mode for open investigation, and a reflect mode with prompts for metacognitive journaling. These multiple pathways allow students to take the option in which they learn best. So, the next framework is embodied cognition. This framework affirms that both learning and understanding are influenced by the body's interaction with the environment. An example of this would be attending a cooking class. The learners are able to practice chopping and stirring while instructors give real time guidance and verbal cues. The hands on action, sensory feedback, and corrective actions create an action loop that builds knowledge in real world performance. Next is immersive learning. This framework uses technology to create interactive learning environments. Immersive learning can enhance engagement, retention, and skill development. An example would be students who volunteer to dig at an archaeology site. The students are able to use delicate tools to uncover artifacts, collaborate with peers and instructors to document and interpret findings. They are also able to receive feedback on those artifacts. Lastly is the social model of disability. This model frames accessibility issues as a result of societal, environmental, and design barriers rather than individual deficits. It advocates for inclusion and accessibility to be built into the design rather than adding it later. For example, a high school is redesigning a science lab so students with sensory or cognitive differences can fully participate by providing adjustable workstations, flexible assessments, and multimodal instructions. If the designers for the science lab took into account all students' accessibility levels, the science lab wouldn't have had to be reconstructed. Okay. Okay, so these next two slides are my literature review. On this slide, I wanted to talk about designing virtual reality. I found in multiple studies that just like the social model of disability example I gave previously, most virtual reality had to be tailored after implementation. Designers did not take into account all accessibility levels, which hinders student success. I also found that although designers are including adjustable interfaces to accommodate diverse learners' needs, some designers overcompensate and include too many models and interfaces, which can alter student learning outcomes. Co-designing virtual reality with learners who have accessibility technology experience can ensure the correct settings and controls to include. So, research states that virtual reality provides immersive, multisensory environments that create learner comprehension and skill transfer, that can increase learner comprehension and skill transfer. This relates back to immersive learning and embodied cognition. These frameworks provide evidence of hands on activities connecting mind and body. Adding tools for accessibility challenged students, such as narration and captions, aligns with UDL to provide accessibility for all in different modes of learning. It has been found that when learners control pacing, interaction methods, and sensory input, VR encourages autonomy and inclusive learning experiences. So, throughout the literature, I found it's beneficial to use embodied cognition, flexible modes of instruction, and perspective to expand access in technology design to ensure institutional support. It's also important to build multiple interfaces for accessibility purposes for through co-design. Um, it's also really important to explore the policies, procedures, and procurement to ensure long term support of virtual reality technology for all learners. Moving forward, I think it's important to use mixed method studies combined with longitudinal evaluations to measure comfort, sensory load, autonomy, and VR features rather than just looking at task completion. Okay, so based on the literature, some of my research questions weren't answered to the fullest. I would like to conduct a study that prioritizes learners' perspectives, teacher lesson designs, and institutional policies. So, for my first question, which is which VR traits support accessibility challenged learners, I would want to conduct semi structured interviews with 32 high school students. These students have to have a sensory or cognitive difference, which will be determined in a voluntary survey that they would take. There would be 5 high schools in all, 6 students from each. I plan to do one school in the north, 2 from the south, and at least one from the east and west. These schools also must incorporate VR into learning. The questions asked will be based on prior VR experiences, sensory preferences, and barriers to learning. This is to gain insight into learner experience. These interviews will be transcribed and coded to organize user stories. Findings will produce prioritized design features and illustrate user requirements. So, for my next question, which is how do design strategies that apply the four conceptual frameworks influence learner experiences? To answer this, I will want to conduct teacher observations. This would include 8 teachers from each school who include VR in their lessons. I will want to see their lesson plans, VR configuration files, and design rationales. I would observe at least 3 lessons per teacher using a standardized rubric to capture fidelity, student engagement, and usability issues. Learner outcomes will be measured with pre and post tests, performance metrics, behavior metrics, and usability surveys. Linking teacher observations to measurable outcomes ensures triangulation of the data. My last research question is what institutional practices are needed to implement and sustain accessible VR within education? Lastly, I would conduct semi-structured interviews with instructional designers and HR representative at each of the schools. The study plans to interview 6 instructional designers and 6 HR staff per school with questions pertaining to onboarding, training, procurement constraints, staffing models, and evaluation practices relating to virtual reality in classrooms. These stakeholders can reveal institutional barriers and inclusive designs that can be adopted and maintained. Data from students, teachers, instructional designers, and admin will be triangulated so a qualitative analysis combined with quantitative outcomes can produce actionable recommendations. And lastly, these are my references that I used throughout my paper and this presentation. I appreciate everyone's time and I hope you have a good rest of your day.